Hey guys, I am making this video as part of a live programming tutorial. Essentially what I'm going to be doing is leaving this video running and recording in the background as I walk through the process of developing a Chromecast enabled website. Now just to warn you, this website is going to be extremely simple. It's just going to be some very bare bones HTML, some very bare bones JavaScript with some jQuery thrown in. But what it's going to be demonstrating is the process of developing an application that interacts with the Chromecast device. In this particular example, I'm going to be making an application that will cast a picture to your Chromecast when you click a button. So very, very simple, but it involves a number of moving parts, especially when you're interacting with the Chromecast API. So, that being said, let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do here is head over to the Google Developers Google Cast page. And this really outlines a lot of the information that you need to get started working with the Chromecast and integrating it into various applications, whether it's your Android or iOS or HTML apps. But before we do this, I just want to walk through some kind of prerequisite items as well. The first thing is, in order to cast any kind of content to the Chromecast, you need to have a website that's accessible from the Chromecast. So in order to do this, you need to have a public IP address or a public website or some kind of hosting where you can upload HTML, CSS, JavaScript. The website that you're on needs to be accessible by both your users publicly, obviously, and then also the Chromecast, because when you're casting content, the commands are being sent from the website, but they're also they're telling the Chromecast what content to use. So if you're just running your website like on a local virtual machine, it's not going to work because the Chromecast can't receive commands from that website. So basically, the general process of getting that kind of thing is to have a website hosted on a VPS. There's a number of different VPS providers. There's Chicago Hosting, Chicago VPS, there's DigitalOcean. But one of my favorite methods for this is actually just hosting all of your content directly on Google Drive. You can look up, there's a number of videos and tutorials around the internet for how to do that, but essentially it's just creating a public folder in Google Drive. You upload your index in HTML, your CSS, your JavaScript right into that publicly shared folder, and you're given a publicly available URL, which becomes the URL for your website. For this tutorial, I'm going to be using a VPS that I have already. You're going to see it as I'm interacting here, but basically what I've done is I've connected to that VPS using an editor called Komodo, and I've connected via SCP, which is basically a way of connecting to the device and transferring files back and forth, and Komodo allows you to connect directly to a remote server via SCP. So assuming that you have all that set up, I'm going to go ahead and get started here developing, like I said, a very basic app. And I'm not going to pause this video for any reasons except for, I don't know if there's an emergency here at my apartment. But other than that, let's get started directly with this new Chromecast app. So I'm here in Komodo. I already have a bunch of folders here. I'm going to try not to cheat and open up any of these files because these are all Chromecast projects that I've done in the past. But I'm just going to create a new folder here, and we're going to call this live program. So now when I head back over here, this is my server. When I refresh my page, I'm going to see my program here, live program. So clicking into that, obviously there's not going to be any files in here yet because I haven't created any. So the first thing we're going to do is start out with an index.html file. So I will create that right now. Alright, once we have our index.html, I'm going to open that up, and it's just a blank file. Now, at this point, I really don't like doing repetitive work, and so instead of retyping everything out, I head over here to the Google Cast GitHub project, which actually includes a number of code samples and demos and that kind of thing. But we're going to go ahead and copy the relevant parts of the HTML, and we're just going to give it a better title than this. and we don't need any CSS, so we're going to get rid of that. This file here we want to keep. This is the Google Chromecast sender library. This is important. It's hosted by Google, but it's important to include this in your app if you're using the Chromecast. And we're going to, so that's the end of the body, and we're going to go ahead and, or sorry, that's the end of the head. We're going to go ahead and close the body, close our HTML, and we're going to head over here. And we're going to see what's next. So what I know is that I have a button on the page, and when I click it, I basically want an image to be casted to my Chromecast. So let's go ahead and get started here with that. We're going to go ahead and search for, we're going to actually go ahead and type in the code to create this button inside of our body. And by the way, I just like to make this a little better. You should always have HTML closing tags. So anyway, once inside of our body, we're just going to create a very simple form. And then inside of that, we're going to create a single button. We're going to give it a type button. And we're going to give it an ID so that we can reference it later. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but we're just going to call it cast me. And we're going to close that up, and we're going to click, or type in the text for the button. We're just going to say click to cast. Alright, so our form is closed, our HTML is closed. Let's add in a JavaScript file at the bottom here. So what I've done here is I've just created a simple reference to a JavaScript file. And I'm just going to go ahead and save this. So that file doesn't exist yet, but I'm going to head back over here, refresh this page, and we should now see the button click to cast. Everything's looking good so far. So now I'm going to go ahead and add in a new file. I'm going to create my script, and now I have a JavaScript file. Next thing I'm going to do is add in the jQuery library. We can go ahead and, I know that Google hosts a bunch of jQuery libraries, so I'm going to search for the URL that I need to include in here. And this is exactly what I want, so we're going to just highlight this, copy it, head back over here, and paste it here. Alright, so now we should have the jQuery library included inside of our page. So let's head over to the script file, and we're going to do a, we're basically going to do a one-page load, and I forget the exact syntax for this, so I'm just going to do a Google search, and it's document.ready, that's what I'm looking for. So here's just a good example. Copy that out, get rid of that extra $sign, and we're just going to throw an alert box in here real quick to make sure that our script's actually being loaded. Head back over to the page, refresh, and we see the 1. Alright, so everything's working. Alright, now, first thing we want to do is hook up all of the necessary Chromecast work. So to do that, we're going to figure out what we need to do by looking at some examples. Alright, so there's a ton of stuff here in this file. I'm doing some really basic stuff. Obviously, I don't need everything that's here, but I am going to need some. So let's get started with this. We'll copy out some of our global variables. Now, since I'm just casting an image, obviously I don't need all of the stuff that's associated with current time, progress. That's all stuff to do with videos. So we're going to go ahead and copy the current media session, put these in our global variable scope, and we're going to grab the session as well. Alright, so now we're going to scroll on down and keep reading through here. So this initialization function, it looks like this is going to be helpful. Now, one thing I'm doing here is I'm putting this inside of the document.ready function, so that we can wait until the page loads before we try this. So what does this function do? So this is just an if statement. It checks to see if the Chromecast library has been loaded, or if it's and also make sure if it's available. And if it isn't available, it sets a timeout, which at the end of 1,000 milliseconds calls this function Initializing API. So in order to have that actually execute anything, we need to create the function called Initializing API. And of course, that's included right here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the whole thing. I'm going to get rid of the parts that are irrelevant here in a second. I hate this tabbing scheme. Alright, so Initializing API. What we're doing here is writing down all of the stuff inside of this function is going to be executed if the Chromecast is not available. So we don't need anything with query parameters. Get rid of that. Essentially what's happening here is they're setting up auto join policies. We don't want that. We're just going to set the default auto join policy. We'll deal with those kinds of things later. Alright, now we're going to create a session request. The session request is essentially what binds our web page to a Chromecast session. We're also going to pass in the API config. This passes a bunch of options along to the initial Chromecast setup. And you can see here that all of these things are references to things that don't exist yet. So we need to, one by one, copy those in as well. Alrighty. Just checking the temperature here on my laptop. So, we've now created the Chromecast API config. We need to pass in, like I said, the session request, session listener, a receiver listener, and an auto join policy. We're just going to create the auto join policy here by default. That will be our auto join policy. So now we need to create these other things. Session request, that's going to be the first thing. Session request is created right here, so that's good to go. Session listener, that's the next one we want to look at. Where is session listener? So I'm going to do a search for session listener, and you can see here we now have a session listener. So I'm going to copy this function as well, paste that in here. Alrighty, so basically there's a lot of stuff in here that we don't need. I'm just going to get rid of this append message thing. We want to keep the session setting because this will set our global session variable equal to the session that it grabs when the Chromecast gets configured. We want to keep this, but we want to get rid of this append message stuff. And we have here that we're going to be adding a media receiver, and we're passing in media discovered and an update listener here. All right, let's include our receiver listener as well. I'm going to be explaining more about what all of these are in a second, but I just want to kind of get a very basic setup going, at least something that works before I start talking about everything. So I'm just getting rid of unnecessary code here. What's the last thing? We have the auto join policy. We already got that set. Alright, so we have everything now that's passed to the API config method of the Chromecast library. Now we're going to go through and make sure that we have everything set in our session listener. So what the session listener is basically the function that's called when a session is created. So when the session is created, this function gets fired, and we're going to log out to the console the session ID that's created. And we're also going to set up a onMediaDiscovered handler. What onMediaDiscovered does is it's a function, again, it's a callback function basically that's called when media is discovered on the Chromecast. So there's a difference between a session and then casting media to that session. So you can have an existing session but no media in it. Once you cast an image or a video or anything else, the onMediaDiscovered callback gets called. Same thing with the addMediaListener. Basically, the addMediaListener is a method that's it's basically a listener. It watches for media that's added to the Chromecast. So we're going to be adding in these update and you know what? We can get rid of the update listener because we don't need that right now. So the most basic of basic stuff here is what we have shown on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we get the onMediaDiscovered function set up. And you can see here we have the onMediaDiscovered function. One thing I found with following these GitHub tutorials or examples that Chrome has out is that they tend to be a rabbit hole of functions. So as you can see, each time I paste a function here, I have to go and make sure I get more and more dependencies. I'm trying to strip out as much as possible so that we can get this working. Alright, so the onMediaDiscovered function, we're just going to log, get rid of this append stuff. We're going to set our current media session global variable equal to the media session just passed in. We're adding update listeners. We're just going to comment this out for a second. Get rid of the media current time, get rid of all this, because this is all to do with videos. Alright. I think we have everything that we need. So now, we need to make sure, we need to somehow wire up this button so that when the page loads, we can connect to a particular Chromecast device. So let's go ahead back over here and see what happens when we refresh our page. I'm going to stop this for a second. Alright, the Initializing Cast API seems to be working. Let's head over here and see what we're missing. So basically, when the script is first called, we're just going to follow this through, see what happens. These are all functions, functions, functions. Alright, so okay, so there's a function here that I found called launchApp, and basically what launchApp looks like it does is it calls this Chromecast request session. So we're going to copy this in here. And what we're going to do is on media ready, we're going to call launchApp. So we should be able to see the launching app messages, obviously. Get rid of this extra one. And then it's going to call the Chromecast.request session. And I'm actually going to move this up here once the... Alright, so basically what launchApp does is it begins it grabs the session that's been created. So since API config is being passed with Chromecast, we have this session listener and receiver. We're going to cast this this onInit success. This is a callback. we're going to create it down here. And first we're going to see alright, so I'm going to put a launch app function right there. And we'll just see what happens. Nothing. And I'm going to open up my developer to see it that way. Okay, so what I see is happening is we have an uncaught exception error here, reference error, sorry. One error is not defined, so I got to figure out where I put that. So basically we need to create these. So what these are callbacks. When the functions are done executing, they call these things, and then they do stuff in response. So I'm just going to put error here, and I'm going to put success here. Right, so now I'm going to move launch app back over here. One request session success is not that. So we need to create another function. And we're going to go head over here and see what they did. So it looks like we need to pass in the E, and we'll get rid of this append message, and this as well. Alright, so hopefully that solves all our dependencies. Oh, no. Like I said, a rabbit hole of stuff. Function on launch error. So basically, like I said, all of these callbacks are just simply being executed when different things happen. So right now, all we're doing is just doing some console logs. But if this were like a production application, obviously you would want to have like some error messages or something like that to help out. There we go. Cool. So what we now have happening is a session is being created. It's detecting the Chromecast on the network, and it's calling the launch app function. What the launch app function does is it forces the user to select a Chromecast device from their list, and if they successfully connect to the session, we'll see what happens. Session success. There we go. This is the ID of the session. We now have a session with our Chromecast. But yet, what's happening on my TV right now is literally nothing. It's just a black box, a little Chromecast icon in the middle. What that means is we have a session, but we're not sending any media to it. So now we need to hook up the button that we created here, Cast Me. We need to hook this up so that we can join into the sessions. Sorry about that. How did I... Apparently I just decreased the size of this thing. Alright. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a jQuery event handler for, I think we called it Cast Me, and we're going to do click, and the event is going to be E, and like we did before, we're just going to throw an alert in here to make sure this handler works. Head back over here, refresh, it's going to try to do the whole cast thing again, so we're going to click this button, and boom, there's the alert. So that means that that handler is working. Alright, now let's head over to our GitHub examples here and try to figure out how they're passing in media to the Chromecast. So there looks like there's this function here called load media. So I'm going to see where they're calling it from. So it looks like basically what we need to do is we need to specify some media info information, obviously, which would include things like the URL of the image. And then we need to pass in this object to the current session by calling session.loadMedia. So let's go ahead and do this. Figure out where they're getting this media. So, current media index. Okay. So basically, this app is set up to cycle through a bunch of different. So you have, like, you see these this case select here. It's using this current media index to pass in a bunch of information. We're only going to be using one of them, so we can just get rid of that completely. So let's go ahead and create a function here called load media. We don't need to pass it any arguments. And I'm going to go ahead and move this inside of the page, or when the page is ready, so that we can not avoid any scope issues. Alright, so now we need to figure out what kind of stuff we need to put on this media info object. So here it is. Var media info is a new cast media info. Boom. So it looks like, you know, I'm going to put this inside of here instead. And chrome.cast.media.mediainfo, let's figure out what kinds of things we need to pass to this. I'm pretty sure that the first property is, or the first argument here is going to be the URL, and then I think this is going to be the image mine type. Is it like mine type for PNG? So let's figure out PNG. Image/PNG is the mine type that I'm looking for. And let's grab a PNG image from Google. What should we do? Cats PNG. Alright, so I found the cat that I want to cast. And let's put that in here for the URL. Alright, so now we've created a media info object. Let's see what else we need to do to it. We have mediainfo.metadata, and it looks like they have a number of different ones here, so let's find the one for photo. Here we go. Mediainfo.metadata. We don't need all of this stuff. So we can do photo metadata. It's a metadata type of photo, and we do need the content type, so let's throw that in there as well and change this to PNG. Okay, cool. So now we've created a media info object, so let's see where that's used. Alright, it looks like they're passing that in here to a new request on the chrome.cast.media.loadRequest method. So let's try that. And then it looks like they are calling the load media method on the session object, passing in the request. The on media discovered. So we already have this callback function here. It's just going to log the new media session ID, and hopefully this will work. Alright, so let's see what happens when we refresh our page. Oh, one thing, we need to pass in the load media. We need to call the load media function when we click our button. So let's head back over here, refresh the page. We're going to need to connect to the Chromecast again. Alright, you can see here we have session success. Alright, so now you can't see it, but on my TV I have a little Chromecast icon indicating the session. Let's click the cast. We get a reference error. On media error is not defined. Okay, let's create a one media error function, and let's just do a quick console.log and just say error media. Alright, so it's already connected to the session. We're going to click the cast and see what happens. Alright, so it said launch error down here, but you can't see it. On my TV right now is a picture of a cat. And it's really cool because it has some transparency effects, so it's literally nothing but a cat on my TV. So let's try this all from scratch. Let's disconnect from the Chromecast. And let's refresh our page. It's going to launch the app again. So it seems to be that it says it's launching the app, but it's not actually launching the little icon. Sometimes I have some weird problems with the Chromecast extension. It doesn't like to load sometimes. Alright, there we go. You can do that. You can increase the timeout. Back earlier when we called Initializing Chromecast API, we can just increase the timeout there. Alright, so now we have a new session. Let's click the cast. And we get a new media session ID of 1. And on my TV is a lovely picture of a cat. So that's everything. We've gone through step by step. We've added all of these different functions. We've copied a lot of stuff from the GitHub project, but at the same time we've also added some things of our own. Like I mentioned in the beginning, it's a really, really, really simple application, obviously. Hopefully I can do some more advanced tutorials in the future. But for right now, this should get you started. So thanks for watching, and tune in next time.